Films! Many films have come out in 2022, but which ones are the best? We're going to tell you definitively today. This is filmindublin.ie. I am Luke Dunn. I am the one that will tell you which films are the best, but not on my own, because I have the lovely Film in Dublin team with me. I have my sister Jess with me. How are you doing today, Jess?
Hi, yeah, I'm good. I have finished my Christmas shopping, perhaps the earliest I
We
ever
don't.
have,
We don't care.
although it
We
is the
don't.
20th of
We don't.
December. So yeah,
We don't care about that.
you asked.
When I asked how are you, I only wanted to know in the context of films. That is the only thing that is important. That is the only thing that is
I
important.
have
Well,
seen films.
Ethan,
it,
you like films.
Some films, no shopping so far, which is all I can say.
Shopping. The only shopping I want to hear about people doing is for the lovely film in Dublin.ie merchandise, which you can see behind me. But we can get to that later. Neil, films?
nice plug. Films, films, films. Got some Blu-rays. Did my shopping. That's the only shopping I've done basically for myself. But yeah, films. What a year of them, one could say. 2022.
What a professional. The time of year when best of lists are compiled. And famously, we love lists on filmindublin.ie. We take them very seriously. We don't take the piss out of the very concept. And there is remarkable consistency every December in terms of how our best of list is made. But as I was saying to you guys before we started recording, people don't care about the format of best of lists. They don't care about the number. They don't care about how the consensus is reached on what the best movies of the year are. What they care about doing is seeing the films that they remember they heard were good and going, oh yes, I must watch that, which they then never do. And they care about scrolling through your list and seeing that their favorite film is not there and then tweeting you to say that they hate you. So
Or
that's
looking
what we
for
have to offer.
recommendations of something they didn't hear about this year and going, oh, I'll check that out.
Jess, I admire your optimism and I admire that segue. So if you are interested in kicking us off, because you've got a couple of great films that kind of stood out to you this year, some of your faves, would you like to talk about a couple of those?
Sure, yeah. So one great one I'd love to kind of start with is Uma, which starred Sandra Oh. It's amazing South Korean horror film, psychological. I know a lot of those words are kind of a bit of a tick box thing now, where you're going to hear a lot of psychological horrors being on best of lists, and it's like, oh, here we go again.
Is
What
this
I
the
really
new Parasite, Jess, would you say?
No. What I really appreciate about Uma is that while it is about kind of generational trauma and being somewhat disconnected from like where you're from, where your heritage is in different degrees, like Sandra Oh's character is fluent in South Korean. She would have been, I believe, born in South Korea and then traveled to America with her parents, and then her daughter it kind of would identify as American and doesn't speak the language, has no connection or knowledge of their culture. And what I think is quite interesting about it is that it really interrogates what culture is and does, how it works, how it kind of intersects with our relationship with our families and with trauma that's passed down from them. But it also, by the end, kind of reconciles it. So we have Sandra Oh has a really negative relationship with her mother. She knows that her mother had a really difficult life and that life was very cruel to her, but equally her mother was cruel to her in return. And so she gets to kind of confront that and reach a positive enough conclusion without forgiving or overlooking or ignoring what they experienced together. And then she's able to have a more positive relationship with her culture, and then she brings her daughter into that. So I think it's quite interesting kind of difference. We see a lot of things about kind of intergenerational trauma and psychological elements of horror and that kind of thing, but it's kind of just thrown in your face as something that happens. And it's kind of, because it's trendy at the minute, but it's not actually interrogating it. It's not actually giving us much psychological grounding. Like we're not kind of getting anywhere. It's just throwing it in your face and there it is. And oh, we had a scary, jump scare, but oh, now it's got more weight just because there was a psychological element to it. It doesn't just do that. And it goes beyond the story. Like this film is fantastic. Its use of light throughout and color and how that kind of shifts from act 1 to kind of act 2 and then again to act 3. We kind of go back to where we were, but we've, the journey along the way, she's in a different kind of psychological frame of mind, is really, really interesting. And Sandra Oh is always fantastic. I think she's a really talented actress, and I've loved, although I was very sad to see her leave Grey's Anatomy, it's been great to see her kind of be able to be in different projects and really kind of get to meet grips with that. So yeah, would definitely
she's gone from strength to strength really in the last couple of years. And where did you watch this on, Jess? Was this on streaming or was this a cinema release?
Yeah, so on streaming, I would have gotten it on YouTube, which is where I see a lot of my films lately. It's great though, so you can rent or buy films on YouTube.
Yeah, I think streaming is one of those things that, it's not going away anytime soon. And I think some of the big studios have had mixed success this year in terms of just throwing stuff onto streaming. But that's been to the benefit of the audiences, because a couple of your other favorites this year are across various streaming platforms, possibly including YouTube as well.
Yeah, definitely. So Prey as well, another fantastic film. Such an interesting kind of genre smashing, format smashing film. I went into it not knowing a lot about, like I haven't seen the Predator films before. So yeah, kind of went in quite fresh to it, and I just thought it was incredible. It was really, really interesting. Just a weird approach to take, a very fresh story to give us, and all of the acting in it is incredible. I think it did quite interesting things in terms of visual effects. Soundtrack, very interesting. It was just a fantastic, really, really exciting film, and incredible to get a film as well in an Indigenous language, because for a lot of reasons, for kind of authenticity and things like that, the kind of storytelling, but also, like language protection. A lot of Indigenous languages would be worried about. So it's great to have that as kind of an artifact, especially in a year where you do have Avatar: The Way of the Water and all of the things that James Cameron has said about Indigenous cultures. It's great to have an actual blockbuster that is respectful and that is casting people from the culture that it's representing, rather than saying you should do this or you should behave this way or you should have done these things. So yeah, I would say Prey, amazing film. Definitely check it out if you can. Yes.
I mean, how did you find overall the kind of effects in each episode? Obviously, a big thing is the kind of bringing to light that kind of predator monster in that kind of environment. Like, did you find the overall effects kind of taking away from it a bit, or was it actually up to par? What do you think?
So Ethan is harkening back to an argument that we had at the time that we watched this together. I think it works. I think it's great. I think there's a sense of kind of weight and that kind of thing when he's interacting with the environment and in fight scenes, stuff like this. I think Ethan's main issue with it was the kind of invisible effects and how it switches from being in sight and then being invisible. I thought that all worked. I think part of the issues that we now have with visual effects in general is that we expect them to be seamless to the point of like screenshots, like frame by frame, which is silly. That's not how films are designed to be watched. I think when you're actually watching it and it's moving, it's fine. It works.
Yeah, I gotta say, as a neutral in this fight, I mean, I gotta say, I didn't get distracted by the visual effects at all. I thought it was actually really, really relatively seamless. Now, I'd have to go back and watch it a second time maybe. But my whole thing watching Prey was that I was ashamed that it wasn't released in cinemas, because it felt cinematic. It felt like it needed to be on a bigger screen, right? It was nearly a shame that it was just for lack of a better word, thrown onto a streaming service. But I mean, look, Dan Trachtenberg, you know, if franchise films is all he wants to do, I think give him the keys to the lot of them, because at least he's doing something interesting with them. Yeah, I have to say I really like that one too.
An interesting decision to make as well, to put it on streaming. I think it's an interesting kind of controversial topic at the minute, because a lot of people with disabilities are still kind of like, both from being a critic with a disability or just, an audience member, are kind of like, well, what about me? I still want to see stuff, and I still want to see it when everyone else gets to see it. I don't want it to be cinema release and then put on streaming. But obviously from a money making perspective, that is difficult, and it is then a risk. You're kind of splitting your audiences. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens next year with some of these things, and how releases kind of work. But a big one that I would have seen that was in the cinema was Nope. And it's a great one to see in a cinema, both because it's so explicitly about like cinematic spectacle, and I think Jordan Peele really takes advantage of that in a lot of different ways. But also just seeing it with other people, I think was really interesting. Like Nope, I felt kind of mixed about it when I came out of it, but the sections with the chimpanzee and the kind of like TV family sitcom like have sat with me and stuck with me all year. They really it's like some of the most disturbing scene I've ever seen in anything. The sound, visually, what is and isn't shown. I think Peele was really great at showing us enough that it freaks us out and is really memorable, but having enough restraint that your imagination has to kind of fill in the gaps. That's always much scarier. And I remember vividly just seeing it in a cinema with a bunch of people, completely going silent once we got to the kind of culmination of that subplot, where you really kind of go in, and it feels like it goes on for a really long time, even though it doesn't, just because of how heavy that part of the film is. It's just incredible always, I think, to experience that with a lot of other people, and that's part of how cinema works, which is a negative that we're kind of losing out on with the likes of streaming, especially now that we have so much kind of sensitivity around like water cooler moments of films. You can't talk about it for like a long time afterwards because of people being afraid of spoilers and things like this. But yeah, Nope is a big one this year, I think.
I think definitely in the case of Prey, it was kind of a pleasant surprise for people. I know so many people that were like, oh yeah, I'll just throw this on Disney Plus because I remember the Predator name, and they really got a lot out of it. Whereas where you were talking before, Jess, about kind of maybe a few films that people haven't heard of, I know the one on Netflix, Intergalactic. When you threw it up, I was like, oh yeah, I had heard that, and I think it is so comparable to like animation that people would have really, really enjoyed in the last couple of years, that I think it's definitely worth them kind of seeking out, that one on Netflix.
Yeah, no, Intergalactic is stunning. I think it's just really refreshing to get animation that's made for adults, and like explicitly for adults, not just being kind of family friendly. We hear a lot that animation is a medium, it's not a genre. That's true, but it's not really, sadly, treated that way. What's kind of interesting and refreshing about Intergalactic is, although you can kind of explicitly see some of the kind of inspiration of like Enter the Spider-Verse, that kind of thing, it does have its own unique look and feel and vibe, which is really, really interesting. For those who wouldn't know, like Intergalactic was an animation that was conceived of by Kid Cudi to kind of like a visualization of his album by the same name. So a lot of his music is kind of used as the soundtrack, but the choice of the songs and when they appear, it does kind of go over kind of a classic narrative arc, and it tells the story of these two people who meet their neighbors. They start a kind of situationship, and it's quite interesting. Like, it really kind of interrogates modern dating, and they meet organically, but you see throughout kind of the discussions of this app called Stush, which is, you know, obviously kind of Tinder Bumble kind of thing. Yeah, it just goes in a lot of interesting directions. Like I say, really interesting to see animation made for adults. There's like sex scenes which you don't usually see. They're quite kind of creative, cinematic. You can do things in animation you can't do with live action there, so that's kind of quite interesting to see. And then getting a scene of female masturbation that's not like a punchline. I don't think I've ever seen that in any film. It's just treated as something normal that just happens, as kind of a parallel to, there's a masturbation scene with the main character who's male. So I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, it's on Netflix. I would really recommend checking it out. It's a tight 90 minutes and interesting kind of story arc. So yeah.
And from the smut side of Netflix to other sides of Netflix as well. No, I think it's a really intriguing film. Like, I really think that, and I really like the idea of having something on our list that is, you know, it's paired with an album. It's an alternative way of looking at cinema without going too into the kind of Twin Peaks The Return is a movie kind of thing. I think different kinds of what a film is are always worth having on a list like this. But Neil, there's a few really great films that you had on your kind of short list of what people should check out this year. Some of which are on Netflix and some of which are kind of big blockbusters as well, which is really exciting for us.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice mix between streaming and then those that launch in theaters. Really, first on my list, keeping the Netflix train going, is The Wonder, directed by Sebastian Lelio. Probably butchering that pronunciation, so I can only apologize. But you know, a really interesting kind of director that strangely turned his attention to a story here in Ireland. Obviously written by Emma Donoghue, who of course wrote both the book and screenplay of Room as well, not The Room. And it stars obviously Florence Pugh. This was a movie that kind of, maybe it's just my experience, but it kind of crept up on me. I really wasn't aware. There wasn't, I mean, usually when you know a studio is prepping an awards vehicle, you hear about it about 9 months before. Like, you know, I mean, and like, I heard nothing about this until about 2 weeks before it dropped. And then all of a sudden, you know, Florence Pugh and the cast and crew were obviously in the Lighthouse here in Dublin for what I understand was a great event, just at the actual premiere of the movie.
Ireland's own Florence Pugh. I think she's been officially adopted at this
Yeah,
point.
well, I saw her Instagram where she like snuck a bunch of Tato home, so you know she's Irish now.
Her,
So we can
Jamie Lee
claim her.
Curtis. It's been a good year for
It's been a good year.
claiming,
Good year.
for capping
And we,
new performers.
if we get rid of Conor McGregor at the same time, I think we're doing great. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a story that's really, really interesting. Florence Pugh plays a nurse coming over during the kind of famine time to Ireland to investigate this story of a young woman. I can't remember exactly what age she is, but you know, let's say around I think 10 or so, who is not eating and not refusing to eat, but just not eating anything, and is for some reason obviously not perishing away, is able to you know, sit up in bed, right, get out and go for walks. Just doesn't seem, appears as though she doesn't need food to survive. And what has happened is that their local committee, which consists of an all-male group of, you know, the local parish priest, the local physician, the kind of town judge, etc., have pulled together a team of a nun and Florence Pugh, who plays the nurse, to keep a watch on this girl to see if she is telling the truth and really confirm if it's a medical phenomenon, if it's a spiritual phenomenon, etc. What I really love about it, there's a lot I love about it. It's one of my favorite films of the year. What I really love about it is just how it says a lot as a story in terms of kind of how this committee is trying to utilize and abuse the situation that this girl finds herself in. They're trying to make it either a medical miracle or they want it to be a spiritual miracle so that they can kind of become famous off it in a way. And that's kind of then contrast to Florence Pugh's character, who has a duty of care to her patient and is really, really quite like couldn't care less, doesn't believe in God, couldn't care less about what it is, just needs to make sure that her patient is okay. So I think that's a really interesting idea. Beyond that, I think the performances are superb. I mean, Florence Pugh is just, I mean, she's great, and we all know she's great, and it gets said a lot, but she is great. She has this rare thing of being a recent Hollywood kind of actress that's come through who is not really overly dramatic or theatrical, really quite gives performances that are quite reserved and, you know, I think effective in that regard. I mean, this performance reminded me of that brilliant movie that kind of kicked off, I think, probably her career, Lady Macbeth, which I can highly recommend. Is just, she gives a phenomenal performance there as well. And what I really like about the direction, it's a super strange movie. It's really strangely edited. I don't want to give away a conceit that kind of the movie opens with, because it's so bizarre and it kind of carries it through the movie. But it approaches the movie in a very strange way. It's hypnotic. It's really rich storytelling. I mean, Lelio's direction is brilliant. The editing is great. It's shot like a horror movie, which I really found effective and creepy. I was sucked into the narrative and just wanted to find out what the hell was going on, and I felt really uneasy in certain scenes, like as if something bad was really on the precipice of happening. I just think it's really, you're not going to see from, I mean, you're not going to see a movie as odd and unique as this from that has a star the likes of Florence Pugh, right? Because Florence Pugh is now, you know, up there with the most well-known actresses and actors in the world. So, you know, I think this is unique in what it is. I'm really happy that it launched. It's, you know, cool that it's you know, that there's a lot of Irish talent involved in this as well. I just think it's a really terrifying movie and really deeply compelling movie that's just very odd and really endearing. So yeah, that's high on my list.
I really appreciate Florence Pugh's choice of projects. I think she does really interesting things. She doesn't rest on the laurels of being like one of the biggest working actresses. She'll take any project that really kind of interests her, gives her a lot to do, which I think is great. And it's refreshing to see that.
Big time. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's what I was so kind of blown away by. Like, I think Element Pictures are behind this as well. So, you know, Ed Guiney, etc. You know, like I just didn't hear Netflix making a massive hoo-ha about this, but for me, it's award contender. I think it's up there. It's in my top 3 of the year. Can't recommend it highly enough. Go watch it. And from one Irish themed movie to another Irishy movie, and I never really have a lot of Irish movies in my top 10 list of the last few years, so I'm really happy I have a good few this year. But I'm saying this really mainly to annoy Luke, I think. I have the Banshees of Inisherin, Arabagara, Banshees of Inisherin up there. Let me put out why, and then I'd love to hear your take on it, Luke. But I mean, for me, I only watched this. This is the most recent movie I watched. So I watched it about 2 weeks ago, and it's a movie that's really stuck with me since I've seen it. I think remove the Irish nature from it, right? We all want Irish film to do well. Whether I think this is film 4 funded, so it's probably, I could be very wrong, but obviously it's an Irish story and setting and our Irish talent involved. But remove that from it. It has nothing to do with that. For me, I really liked this story because it felt like it could be set anywhere in the world and be as true to, I think, really interesting facets of human nature, like our need for friendship, our absolutely like really strong like need to attach ourselves to individuals, like relationships, friendships, etc., love, belonging, and kind of how that kind of ladders up to a social kind of belonging. And I just found it really entertaining, funny, really moving, upsetting, and kind of scary at times. And I was just blown away by it. I felt that it was really, really powerful stuff, performed then exceptionally well by Condon in particular. Kerry Condon, who I just think is phenomenal in it. I know there's a lot being made of Farrell and Gleeson. Farrell in particular is brilliant, and Gleeson is always great, and Barry Keoghan, who's great as well. But Kerry Condon for me is the performance of the year. I absolutely adored her in it. I thought she was just phenomenal, and I have to end it by saying this movie was made in a lab for me. In Bruges is one of my favorite films. I'm really a big fan of Martin McDonagh, and I think you can either like his style or you don't, and I get it, and I can see the criticisms that can be leveled against the Banshees of Inisherin. I absolutely can. For me, it worked because I just think its intentions were in the right place. I think it knew when to be funny, when to be dark, and I just felt like I had a lot to say and said it rather well. Luke, tell me I'm wrong.
I won't need you because since I'm editing this video, I will just cut all of that. Or what I'll do is
I'll move my mouth like this, and you just have to go. Neil does not. I do not like the Banshees of Inisherin.
It'll just be a voice that sounds like me, but it's definitely you going Banshees of Inisherin bad. Luke is right. No, don't worry about it, Neil, because this is what we call in the biz a call to action. Anything that people want to see, that what I have to say about the film, they can see in my review on filmindublin.ie. I think you're hardly alone in having it on your list of the best films of the year. I would certainly agree with you in terms of the performances, and I think people definitely got a lot out of the film and really had a real appreciation for the film and an emotional connection to the film as well. So I'm always happy to see that, particularly for Irish based films as well, and for Irish performers, even though everyone is wrong and I am right.
What I really appreciated about it, that's it. What I really appreciated about it though is that it is about Ireland, and it is about a specific Irish experience. And I think, we are still working backwards from The Quiet Man. We are still working to get away from the kind of Americanized, idealized, ideally idle, beautified, positivified version of Ireland, where although everything miserable happens to us, we're fine with it and we do a little dance. I think it's a really interesting interrogation of loneliness, which is quite funny but harrowing at times. That's a really interesting tonal choice, I think, to make. And I really appreciated that it shows the best and the worst of this kind of island living, where you are in this small kind of close-knit community, but what happens when you're not in anymore, or you never were. I think it's really interesting for Barry Keoghan's character. He's always kind of been on the outside, and what the reasons for that are, which is kind of revealed midway through the film, I think is interesting to see and important for Ireland to talk about on the world stage. It's something that now as a country we're known for, and I don't think we've talked about it a lot. I don't think we've seen it depicted a lot in film, and the kind of abuse of authority that happened a lot in 19th century Ireland. And so I think it's kind of important.
I saw also that, I think it was a tweet from some kind of US viewer, and then they said that they couldn't tell that it was a period piece until the end, but because obviously it was kind of, rural in Ireland. So that obviously was kind of taken to mean a kind of insulting kind of side of Ireland, but actually in some ways, the kind of point of the kind of masculinity thing isn't actually so far apart in terms of how it actually was then and how it is now. The cultural kind of things are not necessarily gone away and kind of disappeared. So that's kind of interesting to kind of see how that is kind of perennial, that kind of stubbornness in some ways of the Irish culture, and the kind of corruption as well, the kind of police as well. It's interesting.
But also, our decentralized funding, life on the islands is still pretty similar to that. I couldn't tell that it was a period piece until they started referring to the Civil War, and I was like, all right, okay. But because it's not hugely, they don't have things like internet, running water a lot of the time, unfortunately. So yeah, it's interesting. What are you going to say, Neil?
Yeah, no, I think it's kind of when I say it could happen anywhere in the world. I think this story, there's clear elements to the characters, to the story, to the setting that are very intrinsically Ireland, right? But I think it speaks to a truth that can be anywhere, which is this this need for belonging. And I like the way you put it, Jess, which is like, what happens if you live in this close knit community and suddenly you're weaved out of it? You're like you feel like a spare in it, but it's such a tiny island, you've nowhere to go in this particular example. So I think it's really interesting. I think I think Niall Glynn had a really good Letterboxd review of it, saying like someone finally captured the horror movie version of like living in an Irish kind of village, which I think is a really fun kind of way to look at it too. There's intrinsically Irish things about it for sure, but I just loved what it tapped into, which I thought was it delivered really, really well. Again, about that kind of belonging, and I just I loved it. That was great.
And you mentioned like you don't always get as many Irish films in the kind of the end of year kind of list as you might expect, but it's not the only Irish kind of production that you kind of have as among your favorites this year, isn't that right?
No, and I think we've a few of us aligned on this one, but I assume you're referencing on Colleen Keown. Yes, nice. Not Top Gun Maverick, no. Okay. So on Colleen Keown, yeah, Top Gun Maverick isn't Tom Cruise isn't it's not it's an Irish story.
I've heard his
Yeah.
accent, so
Well,
he's
yeah,
not
yeah.
he's no Florence Pugh. That's all I'll say.
No Florence Pugh. But yeah, on Colleen Keown, look, what can I say about this? I'd be interested to get your takes on it too. I don't want to say much. It's one of those things of it's my top film of the year. I was blown away by it. I've seen it twice, 2.5 times technically, because I ran out of time. I wanted to watch it. I bought the Blu-ray and I watched it at home 1.5 times. I had the best cinema experience I've had all year, and that includes Top Gun. Um, in a cinema, small cinema here, near where I live in Kildare, where we had multiverses opening on the one side. You can hear the walls rattling, you dinosaurs roaring on the other side, and there was about 30 of us in this small screening watching on Colleen Keown. I was prepared to hate the experience. Instead, I sat down with a movie and was moved so much. It is tender, it is beautiful, it is, I think, talk about being true and honest and not Arabic era kind of like about Irish culture. I think this is as true to Irish culture from this setting. I think it's 80s, right? Late 80s. So, you know, that I've seen committed to film in a very, very long time. I think it is wonderful. And again, what I was saying before, it's one of those films that it's number one on my list. It's one of those films that when you love so much, you almost struggle to find the words to describe it because you feel like you're doing no service to it. That's where I am with it. I absolutely loved it. I respect it as an export and delighted that it's an export that we're putting out there into the world, because I do think that it is very true to a true Irish kind of family and situation and the countryside, etc. And how, you know, on the good side of things, we do try and look after each other, but there's also very bad things as well that we need to address as a culture. And beyond that, the performances are just outstanding. It's shot so well. Everything. I can't do it justice by talking about it, except tell everyone to go out and see it. And I really hope, for all it's worth, if it wants to win an Oscar, I hope it gets that far, because I think it deserves the recognition on a global scale. So I don't know. That's my 2 bits on it.
Yeah, and it's just had its American release with a
Nice.
view to obviously the best international feature nomination. It's tracking remarkably well to get that, and it's great. Like, I think everyone's rooting for it, but you're not rooting for it in that way where it's like out of obligation. It is a genuinely
Yeah.
stunning film, and it would be a very, I mean, we talked endlessly about how awards don't matter, but it would be a very worthy
Big time.
and very gratifying kind of nod. And I think it would really kind of tie together the direction that Irish film has been moving in for the last couple of years. And it's particularly gratifying to see it happen for a film that is in Irish, because it adds so much cultural depth to what you see. And like kind of when people are speaking in Irish and speaking in English and not speaking at all is very significant to that story. And yeah, it's a great film. And I think I've seen it 2 or 3 times now, and I like it even more every time I see it, which is always a good sign.
For sure.
It's so exciting though to have that commitment of making a film this strong in Irish, that's a huge risk. I mean, people in Ireland have such a negative view of the language and such a sense of disconnect and kind of divorce from the language. It's really exciting to see that kind of big creative risk taken and then pay off, and to have it doing so well internationally, I think is really, really exciting, and hopefully will be a shift in Irish filmmaking, that we will have more stuff in Irish language.
Yeah, like
I
Rausch
feel
and
it
Frank
feels
was
like
one that
yeah.
was one this year that Rausch and Frank was one this year that people really liked as well, and you're definitely good. I mean, I'm calling Kuhn past 1 million at the box office here, so you're definitely going to see more. And I think it's been a funny year because you've seen quite a few films kind of run and run in that kind of old school way where they're there for months, and they kind of spread through word of mouth, and everyone in your dad has seen it. And there's a particular example of that, Neil, that I think all of our dads have seen and really love. And you mentioned it earlier, and that is Top Gun Maverick.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Terrifier 2. Oh yeah, Top Gun Maverick. Yeah. Top Gun Maverick. What can I say that's not been said a million times? It's great. It's so fun. I watch it on the biggest screen possible. If you got it at home on TV, it's very much it's a dad flick in a big way. I went in. I'm not a big fan of the first one. I think it's fine. I'm a big fan of the Mission Impossible films, and I mean, just Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie, who I think is a producer and writer on Top Gun Maverick too, right? He's kind of like Tom Cruise's handler at this stage. He's doing everything with him. Their commitment to just lifting you off your seat while you're watching a film is great, and I just absolutely loved it. I thought it was everything that the over smushy kind of Hollywood kind of love element to it worked. The insane visuals worked. The over the top performances in some capacities, in some respects, worked. I loved it. It's great. I want to learn to fly. Really a lot of fun. It's up there for me with one of the best of the year. I think it's just a hell of a time.
Honorable mention also to Elvis, which a lot of people really liked, and our dad watched, which really qualifies for a great movie. If our dad will sit down and watch it all the way through, Jess, I think he'd be great. I think Colleen Kuhn is one of those films that it's really going to capture international audiences. I hope that because the funny thing is with the internet, particularly when it comes to awards, it kind of pares down to a handful, and people are like, "Oh, I've got to catch up, and I've got to watch those." But I do hope that people from outside of Ireland hear the buzz, because like even in international festivals, it's always doing well. It's because it is, even though it's kind of in Irish and it's this 80s Irish story, and it is very true to Ireland at that time. There is a universality to it, because we've all felt like that. we've all experienced the emotions that everyone wrote that kind of found family that comes together goes through. And I think it's one of those that it's really capturing our hearts, and that's great to see. And it's kind of my duty, really, as somebody that runs an Irish film website every year that we're doing the best of, to say it's been a great year for Irish film. But it genuinely has, and I think we're at that point now as an industry where you stop saying that it's been a great year, and even behind the scenes in terms of the progress that the likes of Element and Cartoon Saloon have done. They're doing that because international distributors and streamers and all these people are going, we want a piece of that. And you're getting to that point where like people don't say that like Korea's had a great year in film. People don't say India's had a great year in film. They take it as a given that those are strong industries, and that's what we have. And there are challenges that come along with that, and there's further progress that you want to see along with that. But I definitely think it's been a good year. And definitely a couple of the films that I had on the shortlist are great examples of that. I think Ireland has always been very strong for documentary filmmaking. I think that we have history that needs to be delved into in a particular way, and a culture that needs to be delved into in a particular way, in an honest and explorative way, rather than the kind of tourism board way of looking at our island and our history and our cities and our towns. And I think
But to be fair, that used to be where the funding was coming from. Like when PS I Love You was made, I mean, that was an element of the filmmaking. It was actually part of getting the thing made. So yeah, it's nice that we're able now to kind of depart from that and move away from that.
Yep. Do you know the hand up function? Zoom. My green iron. So sorry. Actually, Jess, your audio is a bit distorted there. So you might need to. No, I'm lying. I'm lying. That was a joke. That was a joke.
Sorry.
One film that's a great example of that that came out this year was North Circular by Luke McManus, which I remember going into a screening of that and hearing these people behind me being like, "Is it about the road? Is it?" And it's just such a spurious and hyperliteral way of looking at it. And I really hope that people take to that film in a way that's open to what it's offering, which is an on the ground and from the people look at inner city Dublin. And I think one of the reasons that that's important for local audiences particularly is because people in positions of power are very keen to paint their own picture of what inner city Dublin is, and always has been, and they do that because they have a say in what it will be. and I think it's very important for people on the ground to assert their own vision of what Dublin can be and what they want it to be and what it always has been. And it's kind of described as a documentary about music, but it's really not just about the music, but it really taps into, in a very powerful way, the way that people use music and use any kind of social activity to assert identity and to discover identity and to discover community. And I think that McManus captured that really well. And it isn't a film that makes these points too heavy-handedly. I think we're constantly talking about culture in Dublin these days, and more so on our side, obviously. But it does a really good job of allowing people and what they create to speak for itself. I mean, you have the section with Gemma Dunleavy in it that does a really great way of tying everything together, kind of in the film's closing stages, because you have this very hot current new act that's really creating something that people identify with across Dublin, across the island. And the stories that she's telling about, the women in the flats and how they kind of basically built the community, and how the men would have been working in the docks. And it's this history of the city that you're getting. And, the way that McManus shoots everything in black and white and the way that everything is edited together, it's not about creating a timelessness, it's about creating a sense of, the city is always, cities in general are always in the present and always bundling into the future, constantly with a sense of the past. And Dublin is a city at the moment that is demolishing the past all around it and reasserting who the city is for. And all of the stories that you receive in North Circular are about reminding you who the city is for and what they have to offer, which I thought was really great. And it's funny because we were kind of talking off camera about films that you forget even came out this year, and I think there was one that I forgot even came out this year because it was one that I was anticipating for so long and kind of reporting on for so long, and that was You're Not My Mother by Kate Dillon, which is similarly a really amazing and particularly Irish way of storytelling. And there's so much more cultural context that you have as an Irish viewer when you're watching that film, and you have an understanding of how Ireland treats single mothers and that kind of again inner city kind of community living. there's kind of a horror behind the horror. Like it's Dolan has always been an effective horror storyteller, but in her first feature, she does a really great job of using that in service of something else. And again, not in a heavy-handed way, which we see a lot of in horror. There's a lot of big bold letters. This movie is actually about this. And You Are Not My Mother. I mean, it's overt about what it's talking about in terms of mental health struggles, in terms of a lot of different things, but there's so many layers to that. And again, like where I talk about it being a movie that Irish people can particularly identify with, I think the way that it talks, the way that it looks at kind of very particular bonds between kind of mothers and daughters across different generations in that film, and like grandmothers and granddaughters even, and the way that like you see the kind of bonds develop between Hazel Dupe's character and Jordan Jones. Like there's a lot of different kind of woman to woman connections and communications and communities that you see that film explore, while also being an effective horror movie. And I think that there's different kind of audiences can take different kind of things from it. Would you agree, Jess?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting film and story in the way that it plays with those kind of different levels. Because Luke, you're saying that you felt that it was quite explicit about being about mental health and that kind of thing, because of our, I think as a people, our genuine belief in our good neighbors, the fairies, and our quite negative view of them. We're quite afraid of them. I, for a long time, really couldn't tell. I was like, is this actually going on with her as a character, or is it purely symptomatic of, the kind of changeling happenings of being swapped out? So I think it's interesting that it kind of works on that level for, a kind of Irish audience, but it still works as a story really heavily for an international audience. I'm not saying I missed all of the nuances of the film, but I just think it adds kind of an interesting dynamic to it, an element to it, something that I'm always really interested in, which I think was similar with Uma, is how we are and aren't connected to our culture, and what kind of meaning comes from that, and how that can be for the audience, but also within the film. I think is quite interesting, of like, do I know what's happening here? Is this following what I think it is or not? This is an incredible film.
I think when you're recommending films to people as well, it's always important to kind of let them know, like, oh, cultural context can give you a lot as a viewer, but it's not necessary. You don't want to veer too into the thing where you're kind of putting on your favorite movie ever for your best friend and you're watching them the whole time, hoping that they see all the same things that you did. Those things are great, but really, if a film is overly reliant on that, not that it makes it worse, but it can be really satisfying to see a film that has those things that you don't necessarily need to have that full grounding to enjoy it. And there's definitely an example that I have of that this year for a not Irish film, and that is or the Indian film, the Indian action extravaganza, which your appreciation of may differ depending on how well advised you are of India's history, and kind of or there is a separate and valid discussion to be had about its status as a propaganda piece, and it's the way that it looks at Indian revolutionary history. Like, these things are very complicated, and it is worth hearing people out that have an informed perspective on it. But I didn't, and I thought it was fucking awesome. So I don't know what to tell you. It was one of my favorite cinematic experiences of the year. It is so bold and exciting, and visually, it's not even like, it's beyond exhilarating. It's a knockout, and I loved it. And I'm an ignorant person, and I don't like to learn, so I'm quite happy to leave it there. It was a great movie.
Well, if it's any consolation, I'm there with you. I loved it. I thought it was class. I thought it was, I mean, like, it was interesting. You know what? It's an interesting learning in that, like, I think around the time people were talking about Banshees of Inisherin, Someone I saw someone on Twitter talk about RRR and actually the reality of what a film can mean in the culture it's set in. Like it can be a different package to an international audience than it is to the home audience itself. I knew nothing of that kind of question mark, whether the, is it seen as kind of propaganda in a way versus, I saw none of that in the run up to it, and I was just enjoyed it for the film it was. But it's interesting to learn about that. I think it opens an interesting kind of discussion, which we might leave to Twitter for the moment, but next video.
But as I say, like it always allows for rich discussion. I mean, I've read a lot of very interesting things about Decision to Leave, and about, because one of the characters in that film is a Chinese immigrant to Korea who does speak Korean, but as a Chinese person, and in some instances, needs to have things translated and all that. Like, there's a lot culturally going on in that film that you can explore where you're inclined to do so, where you're not an ignorant person like me. And the same goes for the performers in that film. I've read really great interviews with them about how they worked with Park Chan-wook and how they worked with translators and how they worked off camera together to develop their dynamic without taking away from the dynamic by understanding each other too well. And I think Park Chan-wook is a filmmaker that really, in using kind of tense thrillers to explore how little we communicate with each other and how poorly we understand each other. I think Decision to Leave was kind of seen as a move away from that for him, and kind of was seen as less essential or less immediately essential Park Chan-wook. But I really disagree. I think it really is one of his strongest that I have seen, just because it is such an illuminating perspective from its two main characters, and it is so, like, I had the tweet about where it's the feel bad romance of the year, but like, it's not a joke. Like, the way that it explores romantic longing and romantic feeling, and the way that people develop feelings for each other, is genuinely incredible, and it is a genuinely incredible film. Like, I'd really put it up there with his most famous works. Like,
just on that, I mean, like, it's a film that I came out of it like I knew I liked it. I really, really liked it. And I was kind of thinking, that was great. It wasn't up there in, like you're saying there, with my favorites of his. But with time, it's the one film that I've just thought about the most since I've seen it, and it's really in the little details, just the kind of little details built into the scene. I think it's edited really, really well. I think it's everything, kind of every scene with them in it is choreographed meticulously. And I really, really enjoyed it, and it's climbed up my list as a result. And one thing, like, to shout out Kim Ji-young, the cinematographer on it. For me, I think we get carried away with cinematography sometimes and think it's all about cinematography is just like a Windows PC desktop drawing. That's all it needs to be. It needs to be nice imagery, and there's part of that there, obviously. But for me, what I loved about Decision to Leave is like how it, like, every aspect, like, it goes back to for me what cinematography is about, which is to help tell the central narrative in a way, visually, and like, it encapsulates the kind of tension between their relationship really, really well. There's little details and kind of just the camera movements, how it's staging shots, everything like that. I just thought it was really powerful. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because I think it's just so rich and so fluid, and really just, it's visually just stunning. And I think it's a great story, really great performances. And in typical, there's Park Chan-wook fashion, there's great kind of humor to elements of it, as well. It's probably his more overtly comedic movie of the last few years. Do I want to say that? I think I need to rewatch some of his films before I can actually stand by that statement. But I just thought it was funny in ways, and really affecting in others. I thought it was great.
Ethan, I know it's one that you've been wanting to see. I don't know if you've gotten around to it yet, but as somebody with a massive enthusiasm for international cinema, it's great to see films like that doing well, because it did quite well here. I know it's on movie now, but it did quite well in its local release when it came out here in the city, at least.
It did apparently, yeah. I mean, I haven't personally seen it yet, but I mean, I've seen some of his before. I think more, kind of more recently, probably The Handmaiden in 2017, which is obviously very good. But I mean, I'm looking forward to kind of seeing it. I couldn't quite get the tone of it in terms of just how comedic, whether it actually was kind of more almost kind of rom-com in some ways, working on thriller or kind of kind of comedic. But yeah, I'm definitely can't wait to see it. And so far so good in terms of Park's filmography, I think from my end. Yeah, so it's on movie now, which is great. So I'll probably see it on that service, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, movies is we're not sponsored by Movie. Could be sponsored by Movie at Movie UK and Ireland. If you want to reach out to us, we are listening. But there are a few of the hits of this year that you can get on that platform that I really recommend. I mean, Worst Person in the World. That's another one from earlier in the year, but it is such an emotionally resonant, I think particularly for our generation, such an emotionally resonant film and such an emotionally affecting film. And one that through its runtime just gets stronger and stronger as you and again, that's down to editing, that's down to great cinematography, that's down to great performances, where everything is kind of building on what has come before, and you get to the end and you're like, I want more, which I think is probably and you kind of feel unmoored, and that feeling of being unmoored is basically what the film is about. It's a great example of form and function coming together. After Sun is another one that will be coming to movie, and again, that's doing well locally here. And I think for a debut feature again by Charlotte Wells, that is a stunning film. It's such an emotionally affecting one, and again, she's well supported because that's a phenomenally edited film, and the way that the editing basically, I mean, all editing is storytelling, but the way that the editing actually snaps into focus how that story is being told and gives you the clarity of what is being experienced emotionally. I think it's possibly the best edited film that I've seen this year, and vital for that. Somewhere, wherever you can see me talking, wherever I'm going to work, the names of like directors and stuff, we're going to put all that up in graphics. So the editor I'm going to throw in there as well, just to be a professional. But and again, it's a bit like an here because it's Paul Mescal. It's a real kind of it's a great follow up to the buzz that he has as a star and as a local. You know, it's great to see him in a international production that is living up to the promise that he's shown, because he's phenomenal in that film. I thought he was so good. And yeah, I mean, we're hitting all the hipster marks here. We got Korean films, we got local films, we got movie, and then there's A24 we got to touch on as well, because it's kind of it's the tide is starting to turn, which is inevitable as you approach Oscar season. But it was kind of the online darling, Everything Everywhere All at Once by the Daniels, and it's now starting to get into, oh, it's too obvious a pick, but it's one of the best films of the year. I don't know what to tell you, and you might not agree, but again, we're the ones that decide. We four are the arbiters, and it rules. it like, for me, as somebody that loved for Swiss Army Man.
Yeah.
As someone that loves Swiss Army Man so much, it's a perfect follow on from that in terms of tone, and a perfect expanding out in terms of the directors, their ambition, and while maintaining that same irreverence and using it in service of, again, an emotional core. You know, it is such a stupid story, but it understands that, and it is using that stupidness in service of something emotionally resonant. You know, just like, life is fucking stupid, you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, it's funny because I love Swiss Army Man. It's in a film that I just adore. I was less enamored by everything, everywhere, all at once. And I seem to be the only person I can find, so I'm very much in the minority on that one. But I still liked it. I still really liked it. I think there's some great things about it. it is an exhaustive experience because it's supposed to be, because it's everything. It's very aptly named. Um, but I do think it should be celebrated and seen for a variety of reasons. And I really like the way you put it, Luke, around like they've stepped up their game and gone bigger from Swiss Army Man and still kept a really emotional core and put so much into a movie and still have it being, very emotionally kind of led. I think I think that's really commendable. I think they'll go on to do amazing things even beyond this. So I can't wait.
I
I'm just
think
ready
I'm
to. I had 10 things of Red Bull before I see the next one. But
I think I'm just celebrating the miracle that they're not doing like Deadpool or something,
oh yeah,
because,
oh Jesus, oh yeah. I mean, come
because
here.
that's the
Yeah.
trajectory that you would expect.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
and yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, when I heard the Pig director is now doing A Quiet Place 3 or something, that was a hard pill to swallow. But yeah, let them tell stories about sausage finger worlds. Give them 10 million, 100 million, let them do it.
and what's been nice to see about that is the appreciation for the performances again, because the acting from Michelle Yeoh and from we're gonna edit it so that seamlessly I got his name right off the bat. Short Round from Indiana Jones.
He's been
Stick with me now.
Oh God, I'm very bad at pronunciation. Ki
Fine,
Hu
see you now.
KEHUYQUA.
It's
Ke Huy Quan.
Ke Huy Quan, yeah.
Ke Huy Quan. Which, when you're watching this now, I knew straight away, and I didn't need to check my phone. Yeah, like their two performances are so good and so fun, and they're so well together, and it's been really great to see people get behind them. I don't really understand the momentum behind Jamie Lee Curtis Best Supporting, but sure, look, awards are weird. Ethan, awards are weird. Films are good. What are some of your favorites from this year?
So I have an interesting mixture, what I call probably a hat trick of kind of diverse but interesting films. Hopefully my connection stays stable now while doing so. But so what I have here is basically one kind of what I would call a kind of I suppose, summer blockbuster popcorn horror kind of film. Then also a more kind of, I suppose, generic kind of Oscar awards film, and then also a film I saw at the East Asian Film Festival in Ireland at the kind of beginning of last year in the summer, I suppose. So the first thing is to go through is probably Fall by Scott Mann, written by Scott Mann in the it was quite a low-key release. It came out in about July 2022. Not many cinemas, but definitely here locally. I had fuck's sake. What are you doing? He just okay. Anyway,
Did something
I'll go back to that now. No, a rabbit jumped.
Oh wow!
Different from a fall. A fall was accidental. This was deliberate instigation here. So we can edit that out. Yeah, so Fall basically involves. It was released in only a few cinemas in Ireland, but it's definitely worth seeing as it was at the time on the big screen. And it basically involves this kind of 20-year-old woman who's her boyfriend, as you see at the start of the film, died in a kind of horrific accident, kind of rock climbing basically, and kind of scaling mountains. And she is convinced by her very eager friend to, emerge from her, I suppose, depression and go back to rock climbing in very extreme circumstances. And in this context, she's convinced to go and climb up what is essentially a 2,000-foot kind of major tower, kind of I suppose, water tower, in the desert. And she does so, reluctantly enough. And she goes in the desert tower and she calls up with their friend. And lo and behold, things go wrong. Phone signals go away, and they have to essentially fight for their lives, on this major tower. And I mean, mainly it was quite a low-key film in terms of how it was released and how it was actually known about. But I mean, ultimately, definitely, I mean, on TV, I think it wouldn't hit as well. But I mean, on big screen, it was just like a film that kind of reminded you why it's so important in some cases to go to the cinema and actually see things on a big screen. Just like amazing practical effects. It all looked so completely authentic and real. That sense of height was palpable. And if your palms are sweating for the whole hour and a half as it were at the time, that's a good sign. And that was just incredible, kind of visceral and really, immersive watch, to be honest, because it was just kind of so fun to watch. And
It was
decent acting as well, but it was just like, it was also like a kind of typical thing of what happens if your friends and you are a bit kind of having fun, and then things go wrong, kind of what other stuff comes out, on the basis of that kind of isolation that you're kind of unintentionally in, I suppose. And yeah, a bit like The Descent in some ways, from 2005. So that was very, scary in some ways, but definitely worth a watch. It's just called, obviously, so no, it isn't The Fall like the series with them. It's just called Fall. It's definitely worth seeing if you can, probably on YouTube, I'd say, or other streaming services.
It's great. It was made by the same people who made 47 Meters Down, and I remember being a little bit skeptical of like, oh, now we're going up. But no, it's so fantastic. Like, another kind of concern I had was that it might be like that kind of 237 hours, is that what it's called? Some amount of hours where, it can be really hard, I think, over films with this kind of premise to keep the suspense going and to keep the kind of stakes going over a period of time. When it is just kind of you're trapped, that can be a little bit dull. But it really it hits just incredible beats, very like The Descent, where we're kind of stuck and we think we kind of know where we're at, and we think we know what's going on and the kind of stakes of it, and then it just goes even deeper, even further. Another thing with The Descent is it's a really interesting kind of look at female friendship and the kind of toxicity that you can have there.
We don't want to. The Descent is not a 2022 release. So Ethan, you might.
No, but it's just it's a parallel that really, I think, sprung to mind.
Yeah, it's important because context-wise, like, that is my favorite, my probably favorite horror film of all time, The Descent, probably, in some ways, at least in the last 20 years or so. And it is obviously inspired by that kind of film, but on its own merit, it offers a lot to kind of go for, and it's definitely a lot of fun. Now, like, again, it's now out of cinemas, so that'll definitely affect the viewing experience, to be honest. But as far as me seeing it in person at the time, it was top notch, I think, for what it was. That's one of them. Also, what else do we have? I also want to mention that I would have probably had Smile on this list here, but unfortunately, I had seen the trailer for Smile early on before it came out, about 2 months or so, and it ended up putting so many spoilers in the trailer and kind of ruining the whole kind of scares for that. So that's, I avoided that in the end. So apart from that, onto the more kind of, I suppose, well-known blockbuster film, we have Elvis. I thought it was fantastic. I don't ordinarily like Baz Luhrmann. I don't ordinarily like music films or films with kind of musicals in them. And, I'm not really kind of invested or personally immersed in the whole Elvis story personally, but I went in there and thought it could be a good kind of departure from what I'm used to. And it was fantastic. Brilliant performances, of course, obviously from Austin Butler. And even from Tom Hanks, who I think is generally very overexposed. Decent performance as Colonel Tom Parker.
It's such a endearingly weird performance. Like, I think you think you've seen everything over the last few decades about what Hanks has to offer. I really like that in such a mainstream and high-profile release with such a well-known actor. He went fucking weird with it, and I do appreciate that.
But yeah, I mean, it's a bit like Top Gun with the kind of the non-specifically Eastern European, combatants who you're fighting against. It was just kind of somewhere around there, but you weren't quite sure where. But yeah, so that was definitely, I think, I was thought that some of the scenes and set pieces were fantastic, and some of the kind of music scenes were great as well. Pretty competent, I think. But I think overall, my probably favorite pick of the whole year, to be honest, arguably, is what I saw as part of the first selection of films in the East Asia Film Festival, as part of the kind of IFI showing that back in, I think, probably April 22 this year, or maybe June. I'm not really sure. But it's called White Building, and it's by a young filmmaker from Cambodia called Kavik Nyang. And it's basically his kind of adaptation of a kind of short he made a few years ago documenting the kind of, I suppose, desolation and destruction and eviction from his kind of titular white building where he grew up on as a kid. And basically it involves the kind of chronicles, I suppose, his realization of that, his parents who were suffering from, I suppose, not necessarily deep poverty, but kind of, reasonable enough poverty in the kind of Cambodian context, and kind of showing how basically residents in the apartment complex are kind of indirectly kind of forced to decide whether or not to kind of stay and fight and hold out for a better kind of payment off from the regional kind of government to kind of move them on somewhere else in the city, in Phnom Penh, or to kind of stay and kind of either hold out for more money or kind of take the money and go somewhere else in fear of losing your home. And I mean, that was kind of chronicling, the kind of community of, do you make that call as a team? Do you going to go off in your own way and kind of make the call in your own kind of personal way? And that was quite, I suppose, moving, but also, visually it's so nostalgic to kind of see the kind of colors of the kind of nightlife city in Phnom Penh and in Cambodia, and kind of highlight the kind of context of the history of that building as well, kind of back in the kind of Khmer Rouge genocide days. But I mean, ultimately, it's kind of telling a story of people kind of having to move on by different circumstances, and kind of quietly, the kind of inertia of that coming towards you and not knowing how to approach that. But I mean, it was quite sensitive and very quiet, like not much dialogue at all, throughout the whole film. But it still kind of tells a lot, kind of facially and expressive wise, in terms of the actors who were all, played very well. But I mean, it's on movie now, as far as I can tell. It's about an hour and a half long. It's called White Building, and it probably is, for a number of reasons, a very subtle, but I think my probably overall pick of the year that I saw as part of the EAFFI in the IFI during the year. And that's probably the best recommendation I can give. Another Asian film, of course, but yeah, Cambodia has some great, kind of nuggets there that would actually, I think, do have kind of more wide appeal, as you think, I suppose.
But Ethan, it sounds incredible. Like, it's one that I must watch, and it's great. Festivals like the East Asia Irish International Film Festival at the IFI, they're a really great way of showing films from so many different markets. Like you talked about Cambodia, I think it's vital that Irish audiences support that, because Ireland is an increasingly international place, and we all benefit when we broaden perspectives with festivals like that. So you watching,
I think
now, watch it.
I think people can be like a bit into the whole, well, I've watched Parasite, so that's my kind of international East Asia thing done for the next 10 years. But I mean, it's not just about that. I mean, it's being a bit more broad in terms of how you might pick away, because you won't like all films in those festivals. You know what I mean? So like, some of them won't necessarily appeal to you, which is totally fine. I mean, yeah, that's the way it works. But I mean, even though Korea's gotten so much bigger in the last few years, especially in terms of mainstream audience, I mean, there is still more than that, and it is still, in the context of seeing kind of international films, to kind of try and, I suppose, not be too kind of closed off in terms of what you think you might like, and then just kind of go for it, because a lot of them in the kind of festivals as well probably are more than an hour and a half as well. So I mean, it's not a massive investment anyway, so it's definitely worth kind of broadening it out if you can to kind of talk those things, I think.
Absolutely. And if you're watching this video, you're doing it because you love films and you're interested in people talk about exciting films, both ones that you've enjoyed and exciting new discoveries for you. That's why you log on to filmindublin.ie every day and hit refresh every hour, presumably, to read all the amazing stuff that Neil and Jess and Ethan and write, and the stuff that I do as well. It's why you buy our fantastic filmindublin.ie merchandise, which you can see in the corner of my screen here, designed by the fabulous Amy Lauren McGrath. I mean, if you haven't already bought those, presumably you're going now to the description of this video to say, where can I buy these amazing things? Because you love film and you love the fair city of film and all the great things that it has to offer, and you are excited for what 2023 has to offer, and you've enjoyed everything, all the great films that we've recommended, and all of the films that you've told me that I was wrong to say were bad, and all the films that you read that I said were good, that you agreed with, and we could be here all day talking about them. I mean, After Yang is one that I absolutely could have included on the list of the best films of the year by Kogenaga. And talk about amazing Colin Farrell performances. He's sensational in that. It's an incredible film, and kind of one of those under the radar ones that I definitely recommend people check out. I think even though it was kind of a less high profile one than some of his other films, I think Triangle of Sadness by Ruben Östlund was a really fun, cheeky, mad, and exciting kind of satire. Guys, I'm sure you guys have your kind of honorable mentions that you definitely want people to go and see. Jess.
Yeah, another one that easily could have made it onto the list for me was Master from Mariama Diallo. It's an incredible film. I think it's available on Amazon Prime. If you have that, it's probably also available on YouTube, I would imagine, to rent. Really, really interesting film. So that's another one for me. Ethan, do you have any honorable mentions?
I do want to say that Barbarian was quite enjoyable. It wasn't perfection as I thought it could have, almost been, but it's really, really fun and a bit kind of bonkers as well. Definitely worth kind of seeing, behind the covers or whatever to be afraid of. But I like that.
Nice. Yeah, for myself, Mad God, Phil Tippett, incredible. It's up there for me. Really, really worth seeing. The less you know, the better about it. Just let it completely take over and bring you on this insane journey. And wow, the craftsmanship is incredible. I want to give a shout out to All My Friends Hate Me, which I found, again, it's another film that's just grown on me over the last few months. Really, really toe curling experience, but great film. And of course, so we're not accused of being too mainstream, The Batman, solely because I think it's probably the dumbest film I've seen in the year. It's angsty and angry and broody to the point of self-parody, but I had an absolute hoot with it, so I had to kind of finish on Batman. How better? How else could I do it?
I'll never forget us doing one of these recordings just before the Dublin Film Festival and talking about what the surprise film might be and being like, but it's not going to be Batman because, like, Jeff, we're not going to show the Batman. And then immediately it was, I think while we were recording, it was announced.
So was it Batman in the end?
It wasn't the surprise film, but they were showing
but
it.
was that it?
Okay. Colin pulled a few strings.
Yeah.
Excited to see what next year's film festival has for us. Probably Superman, whoever it might be, but yeah, check out those films and tell us what films that we should check out. That ones that what you have that at home on the other side of the computer haven't watched, and but like in a nice way, not in a why did you mention this one way. We're all friends here. We're trying to learn. We're trying to share with each other. We're trying to just like enjoy. Just like don't tell me I'm wrong. Like just tell me what more I can be right about. That's the energy.
You can tell him he's wrong about Banshees of Inisherin. That's the only one. Everything else.
But the important thing to say with any film or list like this is that, these are the best of the films that we've individually seen. And that's true of any critic. With the kind of content hamster wheel, we expect everybody to see everything and have all this diverse taste. And there's only so many errors that people do have. So yeah, they're never definitive.
That is true, Jess, but the taste of us four is unimpeachable. And though it may be contradictory, that doesn't, like, what matters is we are all in the moments that we're speaking, Neil, Jess, even also, we're always like, we're right. We are an authority on film. And that's why you like and share this video. And that's why you subscribe to us on YouTube. And that's why you follow us on Twitter at Film In Dublin and on Instagram at Film In Dublin. And I think if you've enjoyed this, it's really great to share all the things that the people on the videos tell you. Do all those things, because for sites like
or just tell me your suggestions so I can laugh at them. Like, up to you.
We enjoy what we do so much, and it's always great to hear what you guys think about your favorite films, because you all have such illuminating perspectives and experiences. I value that so highly. And our social media platforms are increasingly cruel and strange and unusable places. So where you hear us and you agree with us or disagree with us, share it around the houses, share it to the computers, share it to the phones.
Tell us we're great.
The content has spoken. We have given you content, and you'll give us in return engagement. And long may it continue into 2023. And long may this time next year we'll be talking about more amazing films, and that ultimately is all that we want. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much, viewers. And we look forward to chatting to you again very, very soon. From Neil, from Jess, from Ethan, and from myself at filmindublin.ie, we're right and goodbye.